Hello, seniors. We are going to be talking about chapter 17 today. Pretty monstrous chapter in terms of length and what happens. We'll at least spend one more day on it. Today we're going to stop discussion up when Brother Tarp shows up and Brother Jack and the narrator meet him in the offices, and then we'll pick up from that point forward. Tomorrow, or I guess right after that point, we're going to discuss Brother Tarp a little bit today. Either way, I'm planning to break it into multiple days here. So we'll jump right in. We see the narrator, of course, the last chapter had his speech that he thought went incredibly well, but many of the people in the Brotherhood had a problem with. They didn't believe it was scientific enough, that its ideology was flawed. And so the narrator's been studying with Brother Hambro for, I'm blanking at the moment. I know it's April. I think it was winter in there, maybe 3 months, 2 months, something like that. I'm embarrassed. I don't know off the top of my head. Either way, he's been studying with Brother Hambro, kind of indoctrinating himself into the Brotherhood. And I think an interesting question then to ask about this is, does he seem to have kind of bought the ideology of the Brotherhood hook, line, and sinker, or is he still following his grandfather's advice and what he told himself in the last chapter, that he's only going to seem as agreeable enough or as interested enough to actually kind of get their approval and then go off on his own and kind of fulfill his own goals and needs once he feels like he's kind of snowed them in terms of his allegiance. So the first thing we see here is, how have you been, brother? I said, getting in. A little tired, he said. Not enough sleep, too many problems. Then, as he got the car underway, he became silent, and I decided not to ask any questions. That was one thing I had learned thoroughly. In a way, I think we see the Mr. Norton dynamic with Brother Jack here, because A, there's a car. B, it's a car with a white man and a black man in it. C, the black man is working for the white man. And D, the narrator's talking about questions. I think that bit about questions is the most significant and important part. He had learned not to ask questions thoroughly. And so at a minimum, we see the narrator saying that his time with Norton has changed him. Whether it's for the better or worse, we'll find out, and I suppose every reader will have their own take. But either way, he's determined that not being overly inquisitive, being maybe silent, in a way maybe even invisible, that is kind of his new approach to what's going on here. So we keep moving on here, but I think it's a clear connection, and we'll see a few more here and there between Brother Jack and Mr. Norton, that although their ages are different, although probably their political affiliations are different, they are not as different as probably we in the narrator would like to believe at this point. All right, so moving on, description of Hambro. That Hambro, I thought, is he a fantastic teacher? A tall, friendly man, a lawyer, and the Brotherhood's chief theoretician. He had proved to be a hard taskmaster. Between daily discussions with him and a rigid schedule of reading, I had been working harder than I'd ever found necessary at college. Even my nights were organized. Every evening found me at some rally or meeting in one of the many districts. Every occasion became a study session, even the parties that sometimes followed the meetings. During these, I had to make mental notes on the ideological attitudes revealed in the guest conversations, but I had soon learned the method in it. Not only had I been learning the many aspects of the Brotherhood's policy and its approach to various social groupings, but the citywide membership had grown familiar with me. My part in the eviction was kept very much alive, and although I was under orders to make no speeches, I had grown accustomed to being introduced as a kind of hero. I think we see the Brotherhood using him as kind of a token member who is going to expand their reach into Harlem. We understand perhaps why Brother Jack is doing this. Introduce him as a kind of hero, keeping that idea alive that he's this rabble-rouser who can unite the people in anger over the status quo. But we also see, I think, the narrator to a degree slipping, at least in terms of his independence. He admires Hambro, and Hambro sounds like an accomplished person, a lawyer, the Brotherhood's chief theoretician, but it sounds as though the narrator isn't doing much dialoguing, that it's simply reading, going to these meetings, taking it in. And we even see perhaps kind of an echo of 1984 when he says, during these meetings, I had to make mental notes on the ideological attitudes revealed in the guest conversations. Why would he be doing that? Well, one is perhaps to be able to rhetorically appeal to them later when he's actually working for the Brotherhood, but the other one would maybe to see who holds unorthodox or even incorrect beliefs himself. It seems like he's eager to get to the other side of that looking glass where he can judge people for their beliefs rather than him being judged for not understanding the theory. So it seems as though there's a bit of, again, selfishness, perhaps arrogance, at least manipulation taking place on the part of the Brotherhood towards the narrator, but also on the narrator towards the people outside of the Brotherhood. It's clear that he's eager for the status and power and maybe even, in a way, verbal violence that the Brotherhood can confer to him. All right, so moving on. Before me in the panel where a mirror is usually placed, I could see a scene from a bullfight. The bull charging close to the man, and the man swinging the red cape in sculpted folds so close, give me a moment, to his body that man and bull seemed to blend in one swirl of calm, pure motion. Pure grace, I thought, looking above the bar to where larger than life the pink and white image of a girl smiled down from a summary beer ad on which a calendar said April 1. And then I jump about a page or a page and a half ahead to the end of their conversation that they have just in the bar quickly there. Now that's nice to hear. I said, aware now of another bullfight scene down the bar in which the matador was being swept skyward on the bulls or on the black bull's horns. I've worked pretty hard trying to master the ideology. This scene will come up later, so I think it's an important scene to pay attention to, although this description of, this image of a matador and a bull seem maybe to the casual reader like they're just thrown in to meet a word count. Either way, some of the descriptions I think are interesting. We have the bull, which is described as a black bull, at least in the second case here. And I think maybe to a degree, identify that with the narrator. We also have a man swinging the red cape in sculpted folds so close to his body that man and bull seem to be blended in one swirl of calm, pure motion. I think we have to think of that red, although it is, traditionally the color of a bullfighter's cape, also as kind of communism. It's traditionally the idea of, the color associated with communism. We hear about the Red Scare in, the 1950s United States, all sorts of kind of, language and even insults around being red or being pink in terms of being sympathetic to communism. So we can look at it, I think, several ways. One is that the narrator is the bull, and the simplest reason for that is simply that they're black. The man swinging the red cape would seem to be Jack swinging the cape of kind of communist ideology in front of him, and that this is a moment where it seems as though the folds are so close to his body that man and bull seem to blend in one swirl of calm, pure motion. It seems in a way like a very optimistic, kind of synergistic view or cooperative view of what's going on here. And so it's interesting that it's the first position. Obviously, we have to remember it's a bull fight. It's not, a bull get to know you. So the bull is going to be killed here by the matador, at least in this first scene that we see. But either way, I think there's some symbolism that Ellison is trying to make us aware of. The other interesting thing here is that after he thinks pure grace about the scene of the bullfighter, he looks above to where larger than life the pink and white image of a girl smiled down from a summary beer ad on which a calendar said April 1. The pink and white image of a girl, we've had very few women in this book at this point, fewer still who have had names. In terms of what we've read recently, the only two names we've had are Mary Rambo and Emma. Mary Rambo, I'm going to venture and say, is not the pink and white image of a girl smiling down. That's most likely Emma. And so, again, I think this will make more sense as we go through it. And later, Ellison is going to recall this image and add some more context to it. But it seems to be these characters almost in a tableau or something of kind of their interactions at this moment. And interestingly, April 1... April 1st, April Fool's Day, Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it's just sarcasm about this scene actually being the case, or the narrator being the fool, being fooled on this day by Brother Jack. But a lot going on in what seems like just an almost Dickensian description of setting here. Moving on, now that's nice to hear, I said, aware now of another bullfight scene down the bar, in which the matador was being swept skyward on the black bull's horns. I've worked pretty hard trying to master the ideology. I think we could see that maybe this is the narrator's hopes. It's further down the bar, and so maybe it's in the future, and the narrator has this idea of the matador being killed by the bull kind of ascending in terms of its power, because the narrator has worked pretty hard trying to master the ideology. I don't think it gives anything away to say that the narrator and the Brotherhood have a pretty acrimonious breakup later in the book, but I think that's a plausible explanation for why this scene that the narrator sees further down the bar seems to be a positive one, in which the bull has kind of bested the matador. All right, so moving on, but tell me, how have you found your work with Brother Hambro? Oh, fine, I said. He's strict, but if I had had teachers like him in college, I'd know a few things. He's taught me a lot, but whether enough to satisfy the brothers who disliked my arena speech, I don't know. Shall we converse scientifically? He laughed, one of his eyes glowing brighter than the other. Don't worry about the brothers, he said. You'll do very well. Brother Hambro's reports on you have been excellent. I think, again, we see the narrator almost trying to kind of provoke or challenge Jack to be on the same level. Shall we converse scientifically? I mean, almost in a way, an intellectual kind of offer to get your butt kicked. Jack laughs, and without giving too much away, we'll come back to this idea of one of his eyes glowing brighter than the other. But Jack is not threatened by the narrator in any way, I think. We can almost think of it as the scene in the boxing ring back at the Battle Royal when the white men from the town were telling the boys to look and not look. Obviously, they weren't in any way kind of sexually threatened by the boys, and so that was a scene where the idea of the boys somehow turning the tables, becoming sexual with the woman, beating the men up, that wasn't on anybody's mind because it just seemed so impossible. I think in a way, perhaps Brother Jack's laugh and dismissal, maybe it seems kind and just kind of, an appreciation of his ambition and eagerness, but it could also be that the narrator poses no realistic challenge to Jack's status. All right, so I've worked pretty hard trying to master the ideology. Master it, Brother Jack said, but don't overdo it. Don't let it master you. There is nothing to put the people to sleep like dry ideology. The ideal is to strike a medium between ideology and inspiration. Say what the people want to hear, but say it in such a way that they'll do what we wish. He laughed. Remember, too, that theory always comes after practice. Act first, theorize later. That's a formula, a devastatingly effective one. Brother Jack saying something that almost comes out of the mouth of Dr. Bledsoe here. Say what the people want to hear, but say it in such a way that they'll do what we wish. That seeming compliant, even subservient to whomever you're speaking to is an effective way to get them to do what you want. And I think we've seen that perhaps even as far back as the grandfather's advice, if you want to kind of draw a line back to that. But at the least, Dr. Bledsoe saying that when he's with Mr. Norton or the white trustees, he's actually in control, even though they feel as though they have control of him. That he tells them things in a way that maybe makes them feel like it was their idea, even though it was Bledsoe's, and Jack says that this is the case. And interestingly, Jack is talking about action and theory again, and he got angry to a degree with the idea of the narrator or people around him deciding when action should take place, but then he gives a confusing statement. Act first, theorize later. I think we have to wonder if he's doing what he just said in this part. He's telling the narrator, action is good, but the real message is you'll act when I want you to act. And so I think there's a lot going on in Brother Jack's mind, and the narrator is at best picking up, a quarter of it at the moment. All right, so moving on, you must not underestimate the discipline, brother. It makes you answerable to the entire organization for what you do. Don't underestimate the discipline. It's very strict, but within its framework, you are to have full freedom to do your work, and your work is very important. Understand. His eyes seemed to crowd my face as I nodded yes. We better go now so that you can get some sleep, he said, draining his glass. You're a soldier now. Your health belongs to the organization. Again, I think we have this kind of odd mode of capitalism, but there's an odd, I think, way that this comes across as echoing maybe some parts of American slavery. And I think we see that in a few places here. One is that we have, it makes you answerable to the entire organization for what you do. This could be the Brotherhood, but this could also be some plantation. Don't underestimate the discipline. It is very strict, but within its framework, you are to have full freedom to do your work, that you can do whatever you want so long as it's to do your work and nothing is outside of that. And then finally, you're a soldier now. Your health belongs to the organization. In a sense, your body is owned by us. That the reason you are healthy is so that you can keep doing what we want you to do for us. And whether or not in any way that mirrors modern discussions about private health insurance, I guess that's up to you. But at a very minimum, it's a very forceful speech. And I think this idea of discipline here is an important word choice. It could mean a field of study, the discipline of medicine, but it could also mean, in a sense, punishment for getting out of line when you get disciplined by your parents or something like that. So again, I think Brother Jack is engaging in doublespeak. He's giving the narrator a description that sounds hopeful, but we could also totally turn it and read it in a very cynical way. And I think if we've learned anything about Ellison over these past few chapters, it's that there's a strong streak of cynicism running through his work. Not necessarily that he doesn't think success is possible or identity is possible. I think we see that by the end of the novel that it is. It just comes at a very, very, very high cost that many people are going to shy away from. So anyways, another kind of idea there. The district offices were located in a converted church structure, the main floor of which was occupied by a pawn shop, its window crammed with loot that gleamed dully in the darkened street. We took a stair to the third floor, entering a large room beneath a high Gothic ceiling. I think we've seen a lot of buildings kind of change in numerous different ways, and one of them has been the Golden Day. It was a bank, it was a jail, it was a church, maybe it was a school, it was just a variety of things before it ended up being the alcohol serving bordello that we meet in chapter, I think, 3. But these district offices were located in a converted church structure. I think what's interesting about that is the church is no longer there. It's a business space, and the bottom of it is occupied by a pawn shop, where people will go to pawn or sell items to get money to kind of exist, through next week or next month, something like that. There used to be a church here, but it's been sold, or the people have simply been evicted. So it's an interesting view of Harlem. The churches have at some point been forced out, or at least left. And I think if we go back to Mary Rambo, the idea of community and kind of truly good community would revolve around some idea of a community like a church. And then the main floor is a pawn shop crammed with loot. That word specifically, loot, having a deep connotation of maybe theft or something like that, maybe even rioting, the act of looting and riot. So a lot going on here, but I think we see that the Brotherhood is, whether you think of them as good or bad, I tend to think of them as pretty kind of two-faced at this point, but they're moving into a rapidly changing community, and it seems as though the community, if the church, kind of for many Black Americans at this time, the central part of kind of social life, has been moved out, and now it's the office of the Communist Party right over a pawn shop. It seems like, there's this kind of ironic, painful situation of change that's happening. Not gentrification, not something positive, but a kind of race, in a sense, I think, to the bottom, and a removal of community for these kind of fly-by-night organizations like the Brotherhood that, frankly, in my opinion, prey on everyone in Harlem, as hopefully you'll agree with me about that by the end of the book. Anyways, I looked into a small office containing a flat-top desk with a telephone, a typewriter on its table, a bookcase with shelves of books and pamphlets, and a huge map of the world inscribed with ancient nautical signs and a heroic figure of Columbus to one side. A lot of these make sense. I mean, okay, flat-top desk, telephone, typewriter, shelves of books and pamphlets, and then we have this huge map of the world inscribed with ancient nautical signs and a heroic figure of Columbus to one side. One, I think, obviously the image of Christopher Columbus is to many people controversial. As the discoverer of the New World, we know him, but obviously what followed and his own reasons and actions after, quote-unquote, discovering the New World, which, by the way, had already been occupied by thousands of years by many people, is a controversial figure. And I think especially to a Black American in this time who most likely has this history of sea travel that's a painful reminder of, enslavement in perhaps their own kind of ancestry. It's an odd image. It's also one maybe that fits with the Brotherhood because Columbus was somebody going out and colonizing a quote-unquote less civilized people. And I think the Brotherhood very much sees themselves as that. So it seems to be, again, a minor detail, but a very important detail for revealing the Brotherhood, how they see themselves, and how the narrator is kind of being slowly, gently persuaded to see the Brotherhood. It's because we attract men like Brother Tarp there that we shall triumph, he said as we climbed in the car. He's old physically, but ideologically he's a vigorous young man. He can be depended upon in the most precarious circumstance. He sounds like a good man to have around. I said, "You'll see," he said, and lapsed into a silence that lasted until we reached my door. We get to Brother Jack's contradictions. If we go back to even the first meeting that he has with the narrator in the coffee shop while he's eating cheesecake, he dismisses the old and the people set in their ways. He says that Mary can't kind of come along for the revolution, but Brother Tarp is somebody physically old, his age is probably a pretty large number, but ideologically he's a vigorous young man. So I think we see Brother Jack again splitting hairs, that if you're old and Brother Jack likes you, well, you're young at heart. But if you're not somebody on board, well, then you're probably too old to get what he's saying. You're too old to kind of figure it out. So again, I think the kind of two-faced, opportunistic, pretty exploitative nature of the Brotherhood at work there. We will pick up tomorrow, starting right after this break. It's where there is the meeting. Brother Todd Clifton appears, an incredibly important character to probably the last third of the novel, and we will stop there. Have a good afternoon, and I will talk to you soon.